Honestly, it's been a lot of nonsense. I think in my 11-year career, I've never experienced the racial comments from the Indiana Fever fan base, and yeah, there's no place for it. And we've been professional throughout the whole entire thing, but I've never been called the things that I've been called on social media, and there's no place for it. You know, we come to play basketball for our job, and it's fun, but we don't want to go to work every day and have social media blown up over things like that. It's uncalled for, and something needs to be done.
Alyssa Thomas just dropped a bombshell that's shaking up the WNBA. After a playoff disaster where she scored only 8 points, Thomas went off on Caitlin Clark's fans. But here's the kicker. The league wasn't having it. Now Thomas is suspended and everyone's freaking out. What did she say that crossed the line? Thomas's words echoed through the stunned press room. But the real shocker, it wasn't just about her performance. Something much bigger was brewing, and it was about to turn the WNBA upside down.
I ran into people who were born in the 40s a couple of weeks ago that were telling me it's worse now than it was in the 60s. But knowing how our society can be, we see the ugliness that exists in certain parts of the country. All I'm saying is you can't ignore it. This is a perfect example, a small one, but nevertheless a perfect example of illuminating the kind of society that we're still living in, no matter how far forward we have moved.
You see, Alyssa Thomas had just experienced one of the worst playoff performances in WNBA history. We're talking a complete meltdown on the court. Picture this. Thomas, usually a dominant force, managed to score only 8 points. That's right, just 8. And her rebounds, a measly 4. To top it off, she shot a dismal 33% from the field. It was like watching a star player vanish before our eyes.
I have Instagram wasn't there waiting for me. Instagram and Twitter, these are choices we make. It could have been somebody from Connecticut pretending to be an Indiana Fever fan, or someone from Connecticut who doesn't like you because you're a whiny victim 24/7. In my 11 years, I've never dealt with what I've dealt with. You know why? Because no one cared about your league before Caitlin Clark.
Now, imagine the pressure cooker that is social media after a performance like that. The moment the final buzzer sounded, Thomas's phone probably exploded with notifications. Fans and critics alike unleashed a tidal wave of mockery and disappointment. It was brutal, folks. Every missed shot, every fumbled rebound, it all became fodder for memes and harsh comments. You'd think a veteran player like Thomas would know how to handle this kind of heat, right? Well, hold on to your seats, because what happened next left everyone speechless. Instead of owning up to her rough game, Thomas decided to go on the offensive. But her target, it wasn't her own performance. No, she set her sights on something, or should I say someone, completely unexpected. In a move that shocked the basketball world, Thomas accused Caitlin Clark's fans of racism. Yeah, you heard that right. She dropped this bombshell out of nowhere, saying, "I've never been called the things that I've been called on social media, and there's no place for it."
We live in a world today. Think about the climate that exists. Think about how unhealthy and divisive our climate is in today's day and age. They're saying it's worse now than it was then.
Racial tension.
Racial tension, okay? So you see this girl, Caitlin Clark, and this is not her fault. It's not her fault. We won't go back. We won't go back. Don't let us go back. There's certain people that want us to go back to a different time, blah, blah, blah. We've heard all of that.
Talk about a plot twist. Now, let's break this down for a second. Caitlin Clark, the rookie sensation who's been lighting up the league, suddenly found herself and her fan base at the center of this controversy. But here's the kicker. There was no apparent connection between Clark's fans and Thomas's poor performance. It seemed like Thomas was grasping at straws, trying to deflect attention from her on-court struggles. This accusation didn't just raise eyebrows, it sent shockwaves through the entire WNBA community. Fans were left scratching their heads, wondering where this came from. Fellow players were caught off guard, unsure how to respond to such a serious allegation. And league officials? They were scrambling to make sense of this sudden turn of events. Think about it. In the span of a few hours, Thomas went from being criticized for her gameplay to being at the center of a racial controversy. It's like she opened Pandora's box, and now everyone was waiting to see what would fly out next. But here's the million-dollar question. Was this a calculated move by Thomas to shift the narrative, or was it a desperate attempt to find an explanation for her performance that didn't involve admitting her own shortcomings? Either way, it was clear that this story was far from over.
Was this game in Austin? Is X still in San Francisco? Was this game in San Francisco? Where exactly did she travel to work and get invaded by social media? They played in an arena. Somewhere, I would imagine, in Connecticut. There were no opposing fans. You barely had home fans. And so no one cared. A couple 300,000 people were watching your games. No one will be tweeting about you, at least Alyssa Thomas. But the WNBA, in its infinite wisdom and cowardice, put out a statement.
As the dust settled, a startling twist emerged. The very move Thomas hoped would shield her from criticism ended up unleashing a storm of backlash. How did her accusation backfire so spectacularly? You'd think accusing a popular player's fans of racism would garner some sympathy, right? Well, not this time. The WNBA world's reaction to Thomas's wild accusations was nothing short of explosive. Fans, players, and league officials were left in a state of utter confusion. Social media erupted with a mix of disbelief and outrage. It was like Thomas had dropped a bomb, but instead of hitting her intended target, it blew up right in her face. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Instead of backing down or apologizing, Thomas doubled down on her claims. She demanded action from the league, insisting they address what she called a systemic issue. But guess what? This move only made things worse for her. It's like she was pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. You know what's crazy? The support Thomas was probably hoping for never came. Instead, she faced even more criticism. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Analysts and former players didn't hold back. They called her out for blame shifting and lack of accountability. One commentator put it bluntly, Thomas needs to look in the mirror instead of pointing fingers.
I don't want to have to go to work today and then she said, and have social media. Do you work on social media? Is that what does she travel? I think, where did they move Twitter to, or X? Where have I heard this argument before? Oh, Donald Trump may be fine, but all the MAGA people, they're terrible. They're the deplorables. They're a threat to democracy. That ain't much of an audience, baby girl. You ain't catching a lot of strays. There was the other comments that she made, and someone hit me. Replay her comments again.
The backlash was intense. People weren't just disagreeing with Thomas, they were questioning her integrity. Comments like, she's just trying to distract from her terrible performance, and this is a new low, even for her, were flooding social media. It was a PR nightmare of epic proportions. But here's the kicker. The more Thomas pushed her narrative, the more pushback she received. It's like she was digging herself into a deeper hole with every word. Former players, who usually stand by their own, were distancing themselves from her statements. One even said, this kind of accusation without proof is dangerous and irresponsible. The WNBA community's reaction was a mix of disbelief and frustration. Many felt that Thomas's claims were not just unfounded, but actually harmful to the ongoing discussions about real racism in sports. It's like she took a serious issue and turned it into a personal shield, and people weren't having it. League officials were in a tough spot. On one hand, they couldn't ignore such serious accusations. On the other, they were facing pressure to address what many saw as Thomas's unprofessional behavior. The tension was building, and something had to give. You know what's even crazier? Thomas's demands for action from the league only escalated the situation. Instead of gaining allies, she was losing them fast. Players who might have supported her were now silent, probably worried about getting caught in the crossfire. As the controversy raged on, it became clear that Thomas had miscalculated big time. Her attempt to shift blame had backfired spectacularly. Instead of deflecting criticism of her poor performance, she'd invited scrutiny of her character and judgment. It was a classic case of making a bad situation worse. The basketball world was left wondering, what would be the fallout from this mess? How would the league respond to Thomas's accusations and subsequent behavior? And more importantly, what would this mean for Thomas's future in the WNBA? WNBA was about to make a move that would send shockwaves through the entire league. As the pressure mounted from all sides, officials knew they had to act fast. Thomas's accusations weren't just causing a stir, they were threatening to tear the league apart. You know what's crazy? The debate wasn't just about Thomas anymore. It had blown up into this huge conversation about where to draw the line between free speech and being a responsible pro athlete. Everyone was asking, how far is too far when it comes to speaking your mind? The league found itself in a real pickle. On one hand, they couldn't just ignore such serious accusations, but on the other, letting players throw around unfounded claims without consequences? That's a recipe for disaster. The tension was building, and something had to give. Imagine being in that boardroom when the decision came down. The air was probably so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. And then, bam, the announcement drops, and it's like a bomb going off in the basketball world. The WNBA decided to suspend Alyssa Thomas.
And so now people showed up, and you're dealing with what everybody deals with on social media. You've got 14,000 followers on Twitter, and Caitlin Clark on the Roots poster or the Roots. What is she talking about? Did someone put Dejanay Carrington's face on something? I don't know. People were waiting for them before the game, after the game, and yelling racial slurs at them or yelling inappropriate things at them. I'd be on board.
Yeah, you heard that right, suspended. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist either. We're talking a significant suspension that would keep her off the court for multiple games. The message was crystal clear. Even star players aren't above the rules. This wasn't just about punishing Thomas. Nope. The WNBA was making a statement. They were saying, hey, we take this stuff seriously. You can't just throw around accusations without proof and expect to walk away scot-free. It was like they were drawing a line in the sand and, dare I say it, changing the game for how players handle criticism. You know what's wild? This move didn't just affect Thomas, it sent ripples through the entire league. Players were suddenly on notice. The days of using social media as a personal soapbox without consequences? Over. Finished. Done. Think about it. How many times have we seen athletes lash out online when things don't go their way? It's become almost expected, but now they've got to think twice before hitting that post button. The WNBA just raised the stakes big time. But here's where it gets really interesting. The suspension wasn't just about punishment. It was like a wake-up call to the whole league. The WNBA was saying, look, we get it. Social media can be rough, but there are better ways to handle it than throwing around unfounded accusations. And you know what? A lot of people were nodding their heads in agreement. Former players, coaches, even some fans who had been critical of Thomas, they were all saying, it's about time.
I've been on Twitter since 2009 or 8, somewhere around there. The abuse, the things that are said and have been said about me will be said about me today. Turn to your teammate and say, hey, cut it out. But that's not what she's going to do or anybody's going to do. They're all going to, oh, it's Caitlin Clark, it's her fans. And now that Caitlin Clark has exited, they'll get to deal with the traveling gay sex cult that they're comfortable with.
It was like the league had finally put its foot down on something that had been bubbling under the surface for years. But don't think for a second that this decision came easy. The WNBA was walking a tightrope. Push too hard and they risk looking like they're silencing players. Don't push hard enough and they're letting chaos reign. It was a balancing act and they knew all eyes were on them. But the reaction was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with hot takes from every angle. Some people were cheering the league for taking a stand. Others were crying foul, saying it was too harsh. But one thing was for sure, nobody could ignore it. The WNBA had everyone's attention and they weren't wasting it. This wasn't just about one player or one incident anymore. It was about setting a new standard for the entire league. The WNBA was saying, we're not just here to play basketball, we're here to be professionals, on and off the court. And let me tell you, that message was coming through loud and clear. Players across the league were suddenly very interested in their social media policies. PR teams were probably working overtime, coaching players on how to handle criticism without landing in hot water.